Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up. I'm going to try to make this video fairly quick because for the most part I actually already have written reviews for the majority of the books that I'm going to be talking about today. I have 9 books that I'm going to be talking about today. I actually read a total of 13 books in the month of April, but 4 of them I have absolutely nothing to say about because they were like some smutty romance like novellas and stuff that I read on Kindle Unlimited to get myself out of a reading slump that I was in kind of in the middle of the month. So I don't have anything to say about them, so I'm not going to talk about them here. I'm going to talk about my stats really quick, and I did include all the books that I read in my stats. So like I said, total of 13 books, which equaled 5,695 pages, and that was like an average of 190 pages a day, which is pretty good. I'm actually very happy with that. I read a bunch in April, which was really good considering I only finished 4 things in the month of March, so I'm happy with that. I read 5 romances, 5 fantasy, 2 literary fiction, and 1 like historical contemporary. 10 of the books that I read in April were adult. 1 was YA, 1 was middle grade, and 1 I would classify as new adult. 6 of the books that I read in April I listened to as audiobooks. 5 of them I read as ebooks. Those were the Kindle Unlimited ones, and then 2 of them I read as physical books. And then in terms of where the books came from, like I said, 5 of them were Kindle Unlimited. I read 1 book from the library. I did 2 rereads this month, and then 5 of the books that I read were from my already owned physical TBR, which was really great. This month I'm going to talk about them in order of genre. I have like groupings of the genres that I read, so that's how we're going to do it. I'm going to start with the 2 books that I reread this month, and both of these were fantasy. So the first one is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. Cole and I have over the last year or so been reading the Grisha trilogy via audiobook. We finally finished Ruin and Rising this month. We took a couple of trips down to visit my parents, and so we were able to listen to the last like half of this. We hadn't really like touched it since like Christmas probably, and then finally we were able to knock the rest of it out this month. So obviously this is like one of my favorite YA fantasy trilogies. I feel very nostalgic about it because it was one of the like trilogies that really got me into reading fantasy, and obviously I'm still really excited to watch the show, but I can like in hindsight acknowledge that this isn't like the best trilogy. This isn't like the greatest conclusion to a trilogy. I personally love it because of the nostalgia factor, but if I read this for the first time in 2022, I would not love it nearly as much as I do. So it is what it is. The other books that I reread this month, I read because I'm on a mission to figure out what my favorite books are, and so I read this as part of that project, and that is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. This is, of course, an adult fantasy trilogy all about a world where the magic system is based on the consumption and use of different metals, and people who have the ability to consume these metals and use them are called allomancers. There are like the rare few that can harness all of the metals, and those people are called Mistborns. And this book follows 2 Mistborns who meet and team up with some other people to take down the Dark Lord. What's he called? Lord Ruler. I couldn't remember. This is a really fun adventure story. I really enjoy the characters. I really love the relationship specifically between Vin and Kelsier, but I will say that on this reread I didn't love it quite as much as I remember loving it. I definitely don't love Brandon Sanderson's writing style, and also I really hate that there is a lack of female characters in this. I'm still really excited to continue on with this trilogy, and that is one of my goals for the rest of the year, is to finally read the rest of the series, but I didn't end up loving this as much the second time around, which is such a bummer. It ended up being demoted from a 5-star read to a 4-star read, which I really wasn't anticipating when I started it. So those are the 2 books that I reread. Now I'm going to talk about all the books that I read for the first time, sticking with the fantasy genre. First, I've got The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book in the Daevabad trilogy. This series follows a girl named Nari who doesn't really know much about her history. She doesn't really know much about her family. All she knows is that she has this weird ability where she can pretty much listen to and understand and speak any language, and also she can kind of detect when people are sick, and sometimes she can heal them. At the beginning of the book, she's doing a healing ritual on this young girl, and she accidentally summons a djinn, or a deva as they're called in this book, and it leads her on an adventure to figure out who she really is and how she fits into this world of Jinn and Deva. It's based around Egyptian mythology and it's set in Cairo, and I did really enjoy the setting. I thought that the writing was really like vivid, and I really appreciated the detail that the author put into this book. But at the same time, I almost feel like there was a little bit too much exposition. I feel like for the first 60% of the book, it was just constantly info dumping about this world and all these different creatures and all the different tribes and the history of this culture. And there was just so much that it was hard to keep track of everything. I did enjoy the latter half of the book. I found the character dynamics and the relationship dynamics to be really interesting. I really enjoyed all of like the main characters in the story, particularly Nari and Dara. I couldn't remember his name for a second. I liked their like relationship and the banter that they had as they went on this journey, but I haven't decided if I'm going to continue on with the trilogy yet, just because I just was a little bit disappointed by it. But I do understand why people love this. Like I can see why it's so loved. It just didn't personally work for me as much as I was hoping it would. I'd really love to know if that kind of like trend of like really heavy-handed exposition continues in the rest of the trilogy, because if that's the case, then I don't think that this is going to be a series that I'm going to end up enjoying, and I don't really want to waste my time. But if it's not like that, if it's a little bit more action-packed and we get to focus a little bit more on the like character dynamics, then maybe I would consider continuing on. So let me know down in the comments. Next up, I finished A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the Shades of Magic series. I actually started this one back in March, and it took me a really long time to finish. I think after I put it in my spreadsheet, it said that it took me 55 days to finish this book, which is just crazy. I flew through the first like 120 pages, and then I basically put it down and didn't pick it back up for an entire month. And then finally at the end of April, I was like, I want to finish this. Like I want it to be off my currently reading shelf. I picked it back up and I sped through the like last 60% of the book. And while I really enjoyed the first book in this trilogy, I found this one to be severely lacking. If you don't know, the Shades of Magic series follows a character named Kel. He is an Antari, which means that he has the ability to travel between parallel worlds, specifically these parallel Londons. And in the first book, he meets a girl named Delilah Bard, and they kind of get mixed up in this mystery together, and they have to go on this adventure to basically save their worlds. In this one, it picks up a few months after the first book ended, and it focuses much more on Lila than I honestly cared about, because I don't love her as a character as much as V.E. Schwab wants me to love her and care about her. I don't care about her. But this one also centers around a magical game, and while I thought that that premise was really exciting, I just felt like the first like 20% or so of the book, the first 120 pages, I guess, super engaging, like really took me right back to the action. I was back into the story and I enjoyed it. And then it just stalled out for me for like 300 pages. And it really wasn't until the last like 100 pages or so that I got reinvested in the story and I like actually cared about the ending. As I was reading this, as I was finishing it, finally, I was like, I just don't think I'm going to finish this trilogy. But the last couple chapters of the book sucked me back in, and I ended up actually going and purchasing the third book. I understand why this series is hyped. I totally get the love for it. I do think it's a really fun series. I just feel like this second one did not have the same charm as the first one, but I am going to continue on and finish the trilogy off, and hopefully the third book will redeem the series for me. We'll see. The last fantasy book I have to talk about is Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the third book in the Nevermore series, which is a really fun adventure middle grade fantasy series all about this girl named Morrigan Crow. Growing up, she was always told that she was a cursed child and she was anticipating dying on her 11th birthday, but instead on her 11th birthday she is whisked away to the magical land of Nevermore, where she gets the opportunity to compete in the Wondrous Trials to join the Wondrous Society. In the first book, Morrigan finds out why she was considered a cursed child and what's kind of special about her, and then the rest of the series kind of like builds to her learning more about herself and figuring out her powers and figuring out how she can be like helpful to this society. There's also a magical school setting, because after she completes the trials, she gets the opportunity to go to school, and so she's learning more about this world and herself and just everything that makes up Nevermore. And I think it's just a really fun series. I think that the third one probably is my least favorite in the series so far, but that doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it, because I had a really good time reading it. I am constantly frustrated by the lack of communication between Morgan and the adult characters in the series, I feel like there's always this like constant withholding of information that would honestly make Morgan's life a little bit easier if people just trusted her to understand and just like shared information with her a little bit more frequently so that she didn't get herself into the shenanigans that she gets herself into. But I'm hoping as she continues to get older, as the series continues to evolve, that it will become less like annoying to deal with that. It definitely feels like we're going to get into a little bit more like mature area as the series continues on, which I'm really looking forward to. The fourth book in the series comes out later this year, I think in October, and I can't wait to continue on and follow Morgan's adventures as she continues figuring out who she is. I really enjoyed this. If you haven't picked up the Nevermore series yet, I would highly recommend doing so. It's such a fun series, and I think even if you aren't a big fan of middle grade, which I am not, I really don't like middle grade that much at all, I think this is still a series you could enjoy. So I highly recommend picking it up. Next, I'm going to talk about the like romance and contemporaries that I read in April. There's only a couple. I'm going to start with one of the books that I read on Kindle Unlimited. This is the only book of the Kindle Unlimited books that I read that I'm going to talk about because this is a pretty popular book on like Book Talk and BookTube right now, and so I just want to share my opinions. That is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. This is a dark romance that follows two characters, Cora and Dean. They are not like the biggest fan of each other. Dean is supposed to marry Cora's sister, and they've known each other for most of their lives, and they just don't really get along that well. But at the beginning of the book, they are both kidnapped by a serial killer, and they are forced into captivity, and some really traumatic things happen to them while they are being held, and then they end up getting free, and the rest of the book is basically just them kind of dealing with what happened to them and understanding the trauma that they experienced and kind of overcoming their issues. I don't read a ton of dark romance, so I want to just preface this review by saying that I'm not super like well versed in dark romance, and I can't say that this is any better or worse than any others because I haven't read a bunch. There are some like pretty traumatic things that happen in the first like 10-15% of the book that I would highly recommend looking up the trigger warnings for. It's not really super graphic, but it is like hinted at, and so if that's something that you could be triggered by, then I would recommend just being cautious about this or not reading it at all. But I did think that the author did a really good job of handling this like traumatic experience. I thought that it was respectful. I don't know that it was like the best because I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to write like dealings with trauma. I don't think that there's like a hard and fast rule for how someone deals with their trauma. Obviously there's not, because everybody deals with trauma differently, but I thought that the way that this was handled was really respectful and compassionate, which I appreciated. My issues with this book are two things really, and those two things are the writing style, which I really did not enjoy. I thought it was pretty basic and left a lot to be desired, and also some of the side characters, I felt like their reactions to this event happening to these two main characters was not necessarily super appropriate. Overall, I thought this was fine. I just didn't like it as much as I wanted to. I didn't think it was as amazing as everybody keeps saying on Book Talk and even on BookTube. I thought it was pretty average. I think it was only okay. Like, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, I thought it was just fine, and I really don't understand the hype for it because in my mind it's just a pretty average reading experience. The other like romance contemporary book that I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was on my 2022 TBR, my 5-star predictions for this year, and I was really looking forward to reading this because I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. She's like my favorite author, one of my favorite authors, and I have enjoyed pretty much everything that she's written. This was her release that came out last year, and I put off reading it because it was getting some pretty mixed reviews and I got a little bit nervous, but I finally decided to pick it up. And I think it's a really perfect summer read. It's a really great book I could see like somebody reading by the pool or at the beach. It has that appeal to it, and I enjoyed the reading experience quite a bit. This follows 4 siblings, the Riva siblings. They are the children of Mick Riva, who is like a side character in Daisy Jones and in Evelyn Hugo. I would say like the main character of this book is Nina. She's the oldest of the Riva siblings, and she is like a model. She's a swimsuit model, and then the other siblings all have something to do with the surfing industry. One of the brothers is is a professional surfer, the other one is a surfing photographer, and then the youngest sibling wants to become a professional surfer. And so the beach, surfing, huge part of this book, but really this book centers around a party that the Rivas throw every year during the summer, and how this year the party kind of spirals out of control and what happens from there. I definitely don't love this as much as Daisy Jones or Evelyn Hugo. I found this one to be a little bit more surface level in terms of the characters. I feel like there were so many characters and we're like flitting in and out of all of these different perspectives that it takes a little while to come to really care about the main characters or even like really get to know them super well. Taylor Jenkins Reid did this thing where she kind of like shows little glimpses of other people that are in attendance at this party, and while I found that to be very effective in the first half to kind of like set up the scene, set up the atmosphere, I think it took away from the story in the end, because when the big like climactic moments were happening, I wanted to stay with the siblings and like keep being in their heads and seeing their reactions to what was going on, but instead we kept like going to all these other perspectives and it got a little bit tedious and annoying. Also, I never really felt super connected to any one character because the length of the book doesn't really allow for that to happen with all the perspectives that we get to read from. I did really enjoy it though. I mean, obviously Taylor Jenkins Reid has a really fantastic writing style. She really knows how to create a moment, a scene, a world. I really love this little like universe that she's creating where all of her books are interconnected, and I'm excited for that to continue to happen. It wasn't my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid, probably actually lower on the list than I initially thought when I finished it, but I still enjoyed it. I would recommend it if you're a fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I do think it's going to be a really fantastic, like perfect summer read. So if you haven't read this yet, I would recommend checking it out. And finally, the last two books I'm going to talk about are two literary fiction, kind of like sweeping saga stories that both completely took me by surprise. I finally got around to reading A Spool of Blue Thread by Ann Tyler. This has been on my physical TBR for so long, like since I think 2015 or something, and I finally got around to reading it this month and I really enjoyed it, and I'm a little bit angry that I put off reading it for so long because it was just this really charming tale. This is just like a family saga. It follows a married couple, Abby and Red, and their 4 children as they grow into adulthood. We get to see how Abby and Red came to be married. We also get to see flashbacks of Red's parents, how they came to be married. A big part of this book is also the house that the family lives in. The house itself is almost like a character in the novel because it plays such a huge part in the development of this family. And so we get to see like how all of these different generations of people feel about living in this house. Like I said, we follow Red's parents into like the 2010s when Red and Abby's children are adults and have children of their own. And I thought it was just a really sweet story. It's not super plot heavy, very character focused, and I didn't mind that at all. I really loved getting to know each one of these characters in the complete like opposite of Malibu Rising. Even though the book is about the same length, I feel like I really got to know every character in this book. I feel like I got to understand and sympathize with, or whatever, every single character in this story. I found a reason to care about every character. I just think the craft of this book was super well done, and I'm so glad that I finally got around to reading it. And while I gave it 4 stars initially when I finished it, it kind of has that feeling of a book that's going to stick with me and I'm going to be thinking about. I might end up bumping my rating up to 5 stars. I don't know. But I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad that I read it, and I would highly recommend it. I also really enjoyed the audiobook. I thought the audiobook experience was really great. And finally, the last book I have to talk about in this video, and I'm going to talk about it quickly because my camera battery just started flashing, is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This was absolutely my favorite book that I read this entire month, and I actually am not going to go into a ton of detail about it here. And I know that's a bit of an anticlimax to finish on because I just said it was my favorite book that I read for the entire month, but this book was just shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I am going to be reading the other 5 books on the shortlist over the next couple of months. And just before the winner is announced, I'm going to do a video where I talk about the entire shortlist and talk about like which book I liked the most and which one I think will win. But I will tell you that this is another like sweeping saga about a woman who was a pilot in the 1950s, and also about a young actress who is playing her in the movie adaptation in the like early 2010s. I really loved the way this author crafted the story. It's not just about the pilot and her like flight, it's also about her life and what got her to the point of becoming a pilot, and then we get to see the actress become who she is, and we get to learn about her history as well. I really loved the parallels between these 2 women and their stories. I just thought it was a really well-crafted book, and I'm so glad that I got around to reading it. Got it from the library, but I do think this is a book that I'm gonna purchase and add to my physical collection because I think it's a book that I'm going to want to reread, and a book that I could get more out of on a reread than I did even the first time. Really enjoyed this. I'm gonna be talking about it more probably in a video in June, so look for that in a little while. Sorry to leave you hanging on that, but yes, loved this. Can't wait to see if it wins the women's prize. Right now, since it's the only one I've read, it is my pick to win. So those were the 9 books that I finished in the month of April. It was a pretty good reading month, and I'm really happy with all the reading that I did. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in the month of April, or maybe your favorite book that you read in April. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!